मनुष्य के मंगल हित अनिवार्य धरती कल्याण। पावन जननी है पूज्य धरा, हम सब उसकी संतान। थैंक यू।
The first speaker for this session is Dr. William Richards, who has already been introduced and the co-chair, so I'm going to pass it on right to him. The title of his talk is Ecological Implications of Transcendental States of Consciousness, Sacred Insights from Psychedelic Research.
Namaste. It is an honor and a privilege to be here. Takes me way, way back to my introduction to Hinduism 54 years ago in the Yale Graduate School with a professor of mine, Norvin Hine, who I just found is still alive at 102. And he introduced me to Shankara and Ramanuja and Aurobindo and Ramana Maharshi and all of these wonderful sources of wisdom that have enriched my life. And little did I know back then that 54 years later I'd be standing before you here. But here I am. I have had this very unique privilege going back to when I was 23 years old, a couple of years ago, when I was a graduate student at the University of Göttingen in Germany, where I volunteered for an experiment with some drug called psilocybin. I had no idea what it was, but it was the active ingredient in the so-called sacred mushrooms that have been used and continue to be used in Central America by Indian tribes, very similar to ayahuasca, which is used in South America, Colombia, Peru, Brazil, Ecuador. When I was in Germany, I volunteered to be a research subject and encountered a very profound spiritual state of consciousness, very similar, if not identical, to what we call samadhi or moksha. Incredibly awesome. It's hard to talk about it. It's whether I encountered it or it encountered me is a matter of language. But it actually changed the whole course of my professional life. And now at Johns Hopkins, I'm a clinical director of what we call the States of Consciousness Research in the Department of Psychiatry. And for 16 years right now, we have been investigating the value of the same substance, psilocybin, in accelerating psychotherapy and preparing people for death and treating addictions and treating depression, in what my colleague Bob Jesse in the Council on Spiritual Practices in San Francisco calls using it in the betterment of well people, to just catalyze spiritual and personal development. And our hope clearly is that the day will come when these substances will become legal in safe, prescribed settings, so people who would like to use this method of personal spiritual growth in addition to their meditative practices or whatever would have legal access. And we're moving strongly in that direction, actually, it's likely that the first legal use of these drugs is going to be in hospice and palliative care. It may happen in Europe before it happens in our country, but it's moving very strongly and sanely in that direction, I'm happy to report. When I talk about psychedelic drugs, it conjures all kinds of images for people because there's so much, frankly, abysmal ignorance out there, not only in the uneducated community, but in the educated community, in part because of the propaganda and the fear of these drugs that occurred in the late 1960s and 1970s that we're just trying to get over and think clearly, which is why I wrote my book, this Sacred Knowledge, Psychedelics, and Religious Experience. It's an attempt to kind of educate the masses about the responsible use of these substances and their really great promise for us if we use them intelligently. I want to stress that there is no such thing as kind of the psychedelic experience, just as there's no such thing as the meditative experience or the natural childbirth experience or whatever. There's a whole variety of experiences. And the psychedelics really give access to these non-ordinary states of consciousness. And what happens depends not on the drug itself, but depends on how the person responds to the opportunity. The drug opens the door to the deeper levels of self or consciousness. And what you do with that opportunity depends on your ability to trust, your courage, your curiosity, your interpersonal groundedness, your willingness to even suffer some discomfort in the interest of personal and spiritual growth. And if you're just looking for getting high, a good experience, some delightful escape from life, the psychedelics are the wrong drugs to use because they take you right into the core of yourself. In the most superficial levels, people experience abstract patterns, perceptual changes that may be delightful and interesting, but they really don't have much significance, except maybe for those of some artistic temperament. But that's what most people think of. It's kind of the tie-dye T-shirt effect, you know, of colors and patterns. But with a little more dosage, going a little more deeply into the mind, you come to what we call the psychodynamic realm, which accelerates conventional psychotherapy, getting into areas of unresolved grief and guilt and anger and interpersonal relationships from childhood to the present. And on that level of experiencing, many of us feel psychotherapy, the healing processes can be radically accelerated. But you go a little deeper. Well, a little footnote here. If at that point you fight for control and you're unable to trust, then you get into panic and confusion and paranoia and maybe a trip to the psychiatric emergency room, which is not therapeutic. But when these substances are used wisely with preparation and skillful guidance, those experiences essentially don't occur because you're motivated for something more profound and you don't run away from any experience. You know, in the ayahuasca communities and in the Native American traditions that use peyote, they talk about the psychedelic substance as the teacher. And when you take the drug, you go in as a student to learn. And sometimes it's a painful lesson, but it still is in the interests of your personal and spiritual development. But assuming trust, if you go still deeper into consciousness, you come to this realm of, we call it the symbolic archetypal realm. And what's so fascinating about this visionary state is that people experience content that they wouldn't expect. That's not part of your usual enculturation. And where it comes from, who knows? I think personally it's empirical validation of Carl Jung's idea of the collective unconscious. An example is a young man I worked with from the inner city of Baltimore who dropped out of junior high school, became addicted to narcotics, was imprisoned, and was finally in his early 20s released in a halfway house that we were running for using psychedelics in the treatment of narcotic addiction. And when I gave him the psychedelic drug, he reported what he called strange images of dancing figures, kind of semi-naked with funny hats on their heads. And a couple days later, he chanced upon a book of Hindu art in our waiting room with pictures of Shiva and Vishnu. And he came running into my office, excited. This is what I saw, this is what I saw, this is what I saw. Okay. Now, how does Shiva and Vishnu get into the mind of the uneducated inner city Baltimore narcotic addict? Okay. Well, we could say, well, maybe he saw a picture in a Life magazine in a barber shop one day or something like that. But that still wouldn't explain why at that particular time something so profound would make its appearance. And that principle happens over and over of people encountering content from other religious traditions and sometimes their own that's incredibly meaningful. But there's a level of consciousness even beyond that, which is central to Hinduism, where the drop of water of the Atman merges with the ocean of Brahman, the unitive consciousness. And we've discovered probably close to 2/3 of people that we give adequate dosage to in a well-prepared, supportive setting can experience this state of consciousness now, regardless of their religious or non-religious background. And it's, personally, I'm convinced it's just intrinsic to human consciousness, and it's there waiting for anyone to discover. But this state of consciousness, in the research world, we call it mystical consciousness. And not as something misty and vague, but as something very precise. We define it with 6 categories: unity, transcendence of time and space, intuitive knowledge, sacredness, deeply felt positive mood, and claims of ineffability that is so completely beyond language and the concepts that we usually think in that you can hardly express it in words. The unity, of course, has profound implications for ecology, that ultimately we are part of the net of Indra, the family of man, that we are all interconnected and interrelated, and it's not only among humans, but among plants and animals and perhaps every atom of the universe. So there's this incredible, powerful memory when one looks back on this experience of having been part of something just incredibly beautiful and something that feels more real, more basic, more fundamental than the state of consciousness we're in right now. So you don't have to, it doesn't matter if other people believe it or not. Within yourself, you're convinced of its validity. There seems to be two ways of approaching it. One with closed eyes, kind of going deeper and deeper into an internal world until the unitive consciousness occurs. And the other is with open eyes, interacting with nature through sense perception until all of a sudden there's this strong intuitive insight that ultimately all is one. I think for those of you who are philosophers, Alfred North Whitehead was trying to talk about that, I think. Just a powerful sense of being connected to everything. Then these experiences, these mystical experiences, are so much more than just wonderful emotion. They also entail knowledge, intuitive knowledge. And among them is this feeling that consciousness is indestructible, which is one reason these substances are being so effective in research with people who are approaching death, because it removes the fear of death and helps people live more fully during the final chapter of their lives. I like to say, just because you're mortal, it's no reason to be depressed. You know, it's most of us are going to die. You know, it's kind of built into life, but we don't have to go through life fearing it. And when people know that, they experience much less depression and anxiety, and interpersonal relationships open up. And it's, I think, going to be part of the medicine of the future, frankly, and I look forward to it. How am I doing on time here? There are other, intuitive insights. Lila, the appreciation for divine play, something the Western religions can really learn from Hinduism. We tend to be so dour and somber at times in Christianity and Islam and Judaism. And the idea of the God who dances is really wonderful. A critical point I want to leave you with or stress is that it is these mystical consciousness states, and they're, you don't have to take the drug again to remember. It stays with you. The memory is there for a lifetime once it has occurred. And in our research studies, we find that the people who experience this mystical state are those who manifest the most dramatic changes in attitudes and behavior afterwards. And we haven't actually done it yet, but I'd be willing to bet that they kill less bugs afterwards. If we wanted to study ahimsa, there's more of a reverence for life, which certainly has profound relevance to this conference. More honoring the divine in other people, even those who disagree with you or see the world differently, which has profound implications for world peace, and so on. Let me just mention, this isn't meant as an advertisement, But I am doing a study at Johns Hopkins right now called the Religious Leaders Study. There's a website for it, religiousleadersstudy.org, where we are giving psilocybin experiences to leaders of different world religions, full-time priests or clergy, and just asking their assistance and feedback and how it enriches, hopefully enriches, their ministries. Frankly, we have openings right now for Hindu priests and Islamic imams. So should you know of anyone who might be interested, we would be happy to hear from them if they just go to the website, religiousleadersstudy.org. There's so much more I could say. If you're intrigued, I invite you to dig out my book. It's actually not even expensive. You can get it on Amazon for $20, I think. But it'll say what I would say if I had another 2 hours with you. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much.
And now I have the privilege of introducing Dr. Sanjay Srivastava. Is that a good attempt? Professor of Political Science in Benares University. We just met briefly. I was reminiscing about my 2 wonderful opportunities I've had in life to walk beside the Ganges in Benares, or Varanasi. Anyway, Dr. Sanjay teaches international relations. Research interests include soft power, public diplomacy, strategic communication, conflict resolution, and peace in India's foreign policy. Other things, details you can read in your own program.